The debate hall is electric, the air thick with tension. The crowd is on edge, waiting for something, anything, to ignite the fire. And then, the cameras zoom in on Marco Rubio, standing at the podium, smug confidence dripping from his every word. Rubio. Arrogant, leaning forward. Kamala Harris has been part of this political circus long enough to know that some of us have been working for real change. Some of us know what it means to put America first, not pander to special interests. The crowd murmurs, half in agreement, half in derision. Rubio's words hang in the air like smoke. He's doing what he does best, deflecting responsibility and shoveling in talking points. But there's something more now, something different in his tone, a sharpness that betrays his confidence. Kamala Harris, seated at the opposite end of the stage, doesn't flinch. She sits tall, her eyes locked on him, the calm before a storm. The silence in the room is deafening. The cameras zoom in on her, capturing the slight shift of her lips, a knowing smile as she leans forward, ready to respond. Harris. Calm, unwavering. Marco, you've spent years telling people what they should believe, what they ought to care about. But let me remind you, you don't get to define what America stands for. You don't get to tell people what makes them American. Not when you've spent your career dividing us. The crowd goes silent. Every eye in the room is fixed on her. Rubio freezes, caught off guard. His smile falters for just a fraction of a second, but it's enough. Enough to reveal the vulnerability underneath that polished exterior. Harris, conted. You talk about America first. But America has always been about more than just the people you choose to speak for. It's about everyone, no matter where they come from, no matter who they love. The silence stretches on, thickening the air. Rubio's eyes narrow, his confident demeanor slipping into something more defensive. The crowd can feel it now, the weight of her words, the power in her calm delivery. It's as if the room collectively gasps, as if they can't believe she just said it. Rubio. Voice shaking, trying to recover. Well, that's not. Harris, cutting him off. It's not what? Truth. Look around, Marco. It's 2025. People are done with the games. Rubio's face tightens. He's been stunned into a moment of silence. Kamala Harris, calm and poised, has just planted a seed. And it's clear, the game has shifted. What happens next could change everything. The room holds its breath. The debate hall may have been quiet, but outside, the political storm had already begun. In the days leading up to this moment, the tension had been building. The 2024 elections were drawing near, and the country was on the edge, unsure of which direction it would take. America was teetering, polarized, exhausted, yet hungry for change. Every word, every gesture, every glance in this debate had the potential to tip the scales. Marco Rubio had spent years crafting his image as a polished politician, the kind of man who could sell any idea, no matter how dangerous, if it fit neatly into a headline. From his rise in the Senate to his smooth-talking appearances on Fox News, Rubio had built a brand that was equal parts charisma and calculation. He positioned himself as the champion of conservative America, the voice of reason against what he liked to call liberal overreach. And with the 2024 election looming, he knew exactly how to play the game. His strategy was simple: throw cheap shots, manipulate the conversation, and present himself as the defender of traditional values. The media loved him, feeding off his every word, amplifying his rhetoric with the speed of a tweet. For years, he had skated by on one-liners and sound bites, never having to truly defend his position, never having to face the consequences of his words. But Kamala Harris? She was a different breed altogether. Harris had never played the game the way Rubio did. Her rise was marked by a fierce determination to do what was right, not what was popular. From her days as a prosecutor to her role as vice president, Harris had always been the one to stand up to the powerful, to fight for the voiceless, to call out injustice where she saw it. Her reputation wasn't built on media stunts or political maneuvering. It was built on the quiet power of truth, and the ability to deliver it with unmatched precision. For the past few years, Harris had become the voice of the progressive movement, the embodiment of a vision for America that stretched beyond borders, beyond race, beyond the political establishment. She wasn't just a politician, she was a symbol of what America could be if it embraced its ideals: equality, justice, opportunity. And now, as the 2024 race was beginning to take shape, she had become the beacon of hope for millions who felt left behind by a broken system. This debate wasn't just a political event, it was a battle for the future of America. Rubio's rhetoric, divisive and combative, was designed to stoke fear and build walls between people. Harris, on the other hand, represented the possibility of a united future, one built on shared values and a belief in the common good. The stakes couldn't have been higher. For the audience watching at home, for the voters across the country, this moment was the first glimpse of what was to come. Who would win this fight? Would Rubio's cheap shots and cynical political gamesmanship hold up against Harris's calm, clear vision for the future? And in the hearts of those watching, a question began to form: what kind of country do we want to be? As the debate approached its first major clash, Rubio's arrogance grew. He was convinced that this would be just another opportunity to score points, to paint Harris as out of touch with the real America. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Kamala Harris had already anticipated his every move. Marco Rubio's story is one often framed as the quintessential American dream. Born to Cuban immigrants, he grew up in modest surroundings in Miami, the son of two hardworking parents who believed that their children could have the future they never did. His rise from humble beginnings to the hallowed halls of the U.S. Senate was meant to be the narrative of hope, resilience, and the promise of upward mobility, the kind of story that earns headlines and a seat at the political table. But beneath the polished image, there was another story, a darker one, full of contradictions and opportunism. From the beginning, Rubio was a star in the making. He rose through the ranks of Florida politics like a meteor, his speeches laced with charisma and promise. He was a poster child for the new Republican vision, young, energetic, with the veneer of a fresh face who could break through the old guard. He spoke about faith, family, and the American dream with such passion that even his fiercest critics found it difficult to deny the sincerity in his voice. He had the look, the charm, and the speechwriters to make his image seem flawless. But what Rubio sold to the American public wasn't the whole truth. Time and time again, Rubio showed himself to be someone who understood the game, not just the art of political persuasion, but the delicate balance between saying what people wanted to hear and what he needed to win. Beneath the glitzy rhetoric and TV appearances, Rubio played the system as expertly as any seasoned politician, putting himself in the right places at the right time, maneuvering through the Senate like a chess player always thinking 5 moves ahead. But it was more than just strategy, it was a game of manipulation. Rubio built his political career on emotional appeals and well-timed statements. He would rise to prominence by making promises to his base, fighting for lower taxes, defending traditional values, and pushing back against the liberal agenda. He claimed to be a champion of the people, always positioning himself as the outsider, even as he cozied up to lobbyists and corporate donors. The more he spoke of fighting for the American people, the more he lined his pockets with the contributions of the very people he supposedly despised. His campaign in 2016 was an exercise in the manipulation of public sentiment. Rubio positioned himself as a moderate alternative to Donald Trump, yet his policies were just as divisive. He knew how to play the media, feeding them just enough to keep them coming back for more while never fully committing to any controversial stance. He was a master of evasion, always deflecting, always framing himself as a victim of the system rather than a participant in its problems. But the cracks in the facade began to show. In 2016, Rubio had a chance to lead, but he failed to stand firm on critical issues. He had the opportunity to speak out on immigration reform, but instead, he wavered, offering vague promises that never materialized into action. When the issue of gun control arose after a devastating mass shooting in Florida, Rubio responded with the same empty platitudes he'd become famous for, proposing minor reforms but never challenging the corporate donors who funded his campaigns. His answers weren't solutions, they were diversions. The American people weren't stupid. They saw through it. Rubio's popularity began to wane, but he adapted. He didn't back down. He leaned into his base more aggressively, amplifying his rhetoric, throwing out scapegoats, and pitting Americans against each other. He played on fear, making the other into an enemy, be it immigrants, progressives, or anyone who didn't fit his narrow vision of what America should be. It worked. His approval ratings soared among the right-wing establishment, but his credibility with moderates and progressives? It plummeted. Rubio was no longer seen as a man of principle, he was a man of convenience, ready to twist any issue to suit his needs. His most recent acts in the Senate, blocking voting rights legislation, downplaying the climate crisis, and parroting false narratives about election integrity, had only cemented his reputation as a man willing to say or do anything to maintain power. He was a master of political theater, staging grand speeches that appealed to his base while quietly voting in favor of policies that harmed the very people he claimed to represent. For Rubio, it was always about winning. Always about preserving his image as a fighter. But in reality, it was about manipulation. He was never as principled as he portrayed. He was simply another cog in the machine, more concerned with maintaining his position than with actually making change. And then came Harris. Kamala Harris didn't fit into Rubio's narrative. She wasn't just a politician, she was a challenge. She embodied everything that he feared, someone who could dismantle his carefully constructed facade with nothing more than the truth. Kamala Harris wasn't supposed to make it this far. She wasn't supposed to rise to the heights she did, breaking barriers, challenging the status quo, and defying every obstacle in her path. Yet, here she was, standing on the stage of the Senate, a force to be reckoned with, about to face off against one of the most opportunistic political figures in the country. Born to immigrant parents, Kamala was raised in a household that instilled the values of service, justice, and resilience. Her mother, Shyamala Gopalan, a cancer researcher from India, was a fierce advocate for civil rights, teaching Kamala the importance of fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Her father, Donald Harris, an economics professor from Jamaica, instilled in her the importance of education, the value of intellect, and the unwavering belief that people should never be defined by their circumstances. But Kamala's story wasn't one of privilege. It was one of struggle, of having to fight for every inch, to prove herself at every turn. Growing up in the heart of Oakland, California, Kamala faced the kind of adversity that would make most people give up. The world around her was not kind to young Black and South Asian girls. She was reminded constantly that she didn't quite fit in with either group. But instead of seeing her identity as a barrier, Kamala learned to use it as a source of strength. She carried the weight of multiple histories, the pain of the African American struggle and the pride of her immigrant heritage. But rather than see this as a burden, it became the foundation of her resolve. Kamala grew up understanding that true change never came from sitting on the sidelines. She learned early on that to make an impact, to stand for what was right, she had to be willing to confront injustice head-on. Her college years were pivotal. At Howard University, she was surrounded by brilliant minds, leaders of tomorrow who understood the importance of not just education, but activism. It was here that Kamala's voice began to take shape, not just as a student, but as a leader. She became deeply involved in issues of racial equality, fighting for the rights of marginalized communities, and challenging the systems that kept them oppressed. It was here, in the heart of Washington, D.C., that Kamala first realized that change didn't come from being passive. It came from the hard, often thankless work of fighting to be heard. Her early career in law mirrored her determination. After graduating from Hastings College of the Law, Kamala began her journey in the criminal justice system, first as a prosecutor, then as the district attorney of San Francisco. It was here that she confronted the hard realities of the system, standing at the intersection of race, class, and justice. But it wasn't easy. As a woman of color in a system dominated by white men, she often found herself under attack. But Kamala wasn't one to back down. In 2004, Kamala made a name for herself when she successfully prosecuted a high-profile case involving a police officer accused of excessive force. She didn't just go after the officer, she went after the system that allowed such behavior to thrive. It was a powerful moment in her career, one that solidified her reputation as someone willing to take on the toughest battles, no matter the cost. By 2010, she became California's first female and first African-American Attorney General, a position that gave her the platform to challenge policies that perpetuated inequality. It was here, in the trenches of political combat, that Kamala truly began to understand the stakes of the fight she had chosen. From tackling the foreclosure crisis to standing up for marriage equality, Kamala didn't shy away from tough issues. She wasn't just playing the political game, she was trying to change the rules entirely. And then came her role as vice president. Kamala's rise wasn't just about her political prowess. It was about her ability to remain true to her values, values she had fought for since she was a young girl in Oakland, values that kept her grounded when the world around her seemed to crumble. It was about the courage to step into spaces where women like her weren't supposed to exist, and to make a space for others to follow. Her time on the campaign trail, especially during the Democratic primaries, showcased the full scope of her strength. Harris had been in the fire before, facing off against powerful forces, standing up to bullies, taking on the big institutions that had long dictated the terms of American politics. But nothing had prepared her for the level of vitriol that came from those who didn't just oppose her ideas, but her very presence. She was attacked for being too tough, for being too ambitious, for being a token who had only risen because of her gender and race. Yet, instead of crumbling under the weight of these criticisms, Kamala rose even higher, her confidence and strength only growing with every insult. She met each challenge with grace and intelligence, never backing down from a fight, always pushing forward with dignity and focus. Her story wasn't one of smooth sailing or unchallenged success. It was a story of grit, of finding strength in the face of adversity, of using every setback as fuel for the next battle. Kamala Harris wasn't just another politician, she was a champion of the people who had been left behind, a fighter for the forgotten and voiceless. She embodied the ideal of what America could be, a nation that rises above its divisions, a nation that believes in the promise of opportunity and justice for all. As the debate began, it became clear that Rubio had no idea the storm he was about to face. The room buzzed with electricity, the air thick with anticipation. What started as a measured exchange now felt like a powder keg ready to explode. Rubio's voice rose in a controlled fury as he launched into his next attack, his eyes narrowing with the kind of calculated aggression that had served him so well in the past. Rubio. Emotional, pointing at Harris. You see, Kamala, you talk about unity, you talk about equality, but where were you when it mattered? You stood by while our country was flooded with illegal immigrants, people who have no respect for our laws. And now you want to lecture the rest of us about fairness? About justice? The crowd tensed, their collective breath held. The question was out there, and Rubio had landed his first real punch. But Harris? She didn't flinch. Her posture remained perfect, her gaze unwavering. It was as if the noise and chaos around her barely touched her. Her composure was becoming a force unto itself. Rubio, taunted. Incensed, leaning forward. We're a nation of laws, Kamala. And your party wants to tear that down in the name of so-called progress. You can't build a better America on a foundation of lawlessness. That's the reality. The room rippled with murmurs of approval from the right-wing factions present. Rubio could feel their energy fueling him, lifting him higher, pushing him to swing harder. His voice rose with the fervor of a preacher at the pulpit, hands gesturing wildly, words sharp as blades. But Kamala Harris was unfazed. She sat there, watching him, her fingers lightly resting on the podium in front of her, her face a calm sea in the middle of his storm. Harris. Cutting him off, her tone quiet but firm. Marco, you can shout all you want. But when you don't address the root causes of the issues you're talking about, when you refuse to look beyond the headlines and actually do the work, it's no wonder we're stuck in this cycle of division. The crowd was silent now, hanging on her every word. It wasn't just the power of her words, they were hanging on the sheer control she exhibited. It wasn't a simple rebuttal, it was the kind of response that demanded attention, that made Rubio's arguments look weak and outdated. Rubio. Frustrated, voice rising. You really want to talk about root causes? You want to pretend that your policies are about helping the people of this country? Because the only thing you've done is open the floodgates and let criminals pour in while Americans suffer. Rubio's voice cracked slightly as he spoke, the pressure mounting on him. His face reddened. He was losing control, but he didn't realize it yet. The more he yelled, the more Harris remained stoic, her eyes piercing his, as if she could see through the bluster. Every word from him now felt like it was being absorbed by a stone wall. Harris, calmly. Let's talk about the truth, Marco. The people you're so eager to demonize are fleeing violence, struggling for survival. And instead of looking for solutions, you're too busy pointing fingers, blaming people who have nothing to do with the problems you've created. It was like watching a matador effortlessly sidestep a charging bull. Rubio's anger was palpable, his voice now tinged with desperation. Every word that left his mouth sounded less like a calculated attack and more like an outburst, a man realizing his carefully constructed narrative was unraveling. Rubio. Angry, voice trembling. You think you can just brush aside the facts? You think your empty platitudes are going to change the reality of what's happening in this country? You've failed, Kamala. Your administration has failed. The crowd was split now. Some cheered, others stayed silent, the tension thick in the air. Rubio had ramped up the rhetoric, pushing harder, faster, thinking he could rattle her. But the more he pushed, the more Harris's calm seemed to shine through, illuminating the flaws in his every word. Harris, leaning forward slightly, voice steady. Failed? No, Marco. I've seen firsthand what failure looks like. Failure isn't about acknowledging that people are suffering and doing something about it. Failure is about continuing to pretend that your way is the only way while millions of Americans are left behind in the process. Rubio froze. The audience shifted, sensing the turning point. Harris's words landed with surgical precision, each one cutting deeper into the armor Rubio had spent years building. The man who had once been a rising star in the Republican Party was now reeling, his bravado crumbling with every syllable she spoke. The contrast was stark. Rubio, the angry, defensive politician who thrived on conflict, was beginning to show the cracks. Harris, on the other hand, was composed, measured, and calm, a steady force that didn't need to scream to make her point. It was as if the fight had already shifted, and Rubio hadn't even realized it. The crowd was now caught in a whirlwind of emotions, from disbelief to awe. It wasn't just the words, it was the way Harris had turned his attacks against him, disarming him with every response, leaving him exposed. Harris. Your fear-mongering doesn't fix anything, Marco. It never has. It only creates more division. The real work. The real change. It happens when we come together. When we act out of empathy, not fear. Rubio's mouth opened to respond, but he hesitated. His next words didn't come out as forceful as he'd intended. The crowd, which had once seemed ready to erupt in his favor, was now quiet, waiting. The tension was palpable, a silent reckoning in the room. Kamala Harris didn't hesitate. The words hung in the air, lingering as Rubio's voice sputtered to an awkward stop. She sat still for a beat, her eyes unwavering as the tension in the room reached a boiling point. The cameras were focused on her now, the silence suffocating. She didn't need to raise her voice to command attention, her presence was all the crowd needed. The battle had shifted, and it was clear that this wasn't just a debate, it was a reckoning. Harris, calmly. You want to talk about failure, Marco? Let's talk about failure. She leaned forward slightly, her voice still measured, but every word came with the precision of a scalpel. Rubio's posture stiffened. He was on the defensive, unsure of what was coming next, the crowd already sensing that something was about to snap. Harris, taunted. Let's talk about the fact that under your leadership, we've seen a country divided, fractured, pitted against itself. You claim to be a defender of the law, but you've turned a blind eye to the corruption, the dishonesty, and the injustice within your own party. You say you're fighting for the people, but what you really want is to preserve a system that only benefits the powerful, the privileged, and the elite. A ripple of gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. Harris didn't stop. She was just warming up, her voice becoming more assertive, each point building with a quiet fury that contrasted with Rubio's earlier shouting. Harris, taunted. You criticize immigration, Marco, but when did you ever propose a real solution? When did you ever have the courage to stand up to your own party's refusal to pass comprehensive reform? You talk about illegal immigration like it's the root of every problem, but you fail to acknowledge the bigger picture, the system that fails these families, that forces them to risk everything just to survive. She looked directly at him now, the gaze of someone who knew exactly how to break down a man who thought he could lie his way through. Harris, taunted. You see, Marco, this isn't about immigration, it's about power. You're using the fear of the other to distract from the real issues at hand. You've been doing it for years, pitting one group of people against another, manipulating their anger and their fear to keep them from asking the hard questions. You've turned this country into a political game, but people are starting to see through it. The audience, once caught in the grip of tension, began to shift. Some were nodding. Others were leaning forward, their eyes glued to Harris as if they could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a dismantling. Rubio's face tightened. The calm demeanor he had worn earlier had long since vanished, replaced with the frantic gestures of a man whose narrative was crumbling. But he couldn't stop it. Harris was in full control now, her every word exposing the hypocrisy that had defined his career. Harris, taunted. You want to talk about lawlessness? Let's talk about the lawlessness in your own backyard, Marco. The way you've turned a blind eye to corruption within your own party, your own donors. You're bought and paid for by special interests, and yet you stand there, pretending you're fighting for the working class. You can't even say, climate change, without worrying about alienating your corporate sponsors. You've sold your soul to the highest bidder, and you have the nerve to lecture me about failing this country. The crowd gasped. There was no more politeness now. Kamala Harris wasn't just responding, she was exposing the very foundation of Rubio's political career. She was taking apart the myth that he had carefully cultivated over years of grandstanding, of clever speeches that danced around the truth, all the while keeping the focus on fear and division. Harris, taunted. Every time you speak about unity, Marco, every time you call for law and order, what you're really asking for is control. You want to keep the same systems of power in place. You want to preserve a country where some people matter more than others, where people of color are scapegoated, where inequality is justified. And that's what you've been doing. You've been using your platform to keep people divided, because that's the only way you can win. Harris let the words linger, the weight of them settling in the room like a thick fog. Rubio's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He was visibly rattled now, blinking rapidly, trying to regain his composure. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Kamala Harris had just delivered the kind of counterattack that political careers were built or destroyed on. She didn't need to shout to be heard, every word was a laser, each one cutting deeper into Rubio's carefully constructed narrative. The crowd began to stir. The gasps of shock were quickly replaced by applause, slow at first, then building into a resounding roar. Harris had taken him apart with calm precision, every syllable landing with devastating clarity. It wasn't just that she had beaten him with facts, she had done it with grace. The tension that had filled the room moments before had completely evaporated. Rubio, standing there at the podium, looked like a man who had been stripped bare. His arrogance, once so assured, had turned to panic, his eyes darting nervously as the applause for Harris grew louder. Rubio, stammering. Well, But he couldn't finish the sentence. The crowd wasn't listening to him anymore. Harris, cutting in, with unshakable calm. People are tired of your games, Marco. They're tired of being used as pawns in your political theater. The applause was deafening now. It wasn't just approval, it was validation. Harris had not just defended herself, she had taken down her opponent. Rubio, the seasoned politician, was exposed. He had been outclassed by a force of nature, and there was no escaping it. Kamala Harris stood there, poised and unbroken, while Rubio struggled to maintain any semblance of control. It was the kind of moment that would be remembered for years, an epic takedown that didn't just win the debate, but changed the narrative completely. But just when it seemed like Harris had won, the aftermath would prove even more explosive. The dust had barely settled on the debate stage before the world erupted. Social media lit up like a wildfire, the hashtags trending almost immediately. The story had gone viral, and the narrative was crystal clear: Kamala Harris had just delivered the political takedown of a lifetime. The kind of moment that would define the 2024 election cycle and echo through the halls of political history. Hashtag Kamala owns Rubio began trending on Twitter, flooding the platform within minutes of the debate's conclusion. A relentless stream of memes, GIFs, and reaction videos swarmed across Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. The internet had become a battleground, but this time, it wasn't Rubio's rhetoric that was winning, it was Harris's calm precision. A video clip of her mic drop moment quickly made its way across every corner of the web, Harris, poised and dignified, delivering her scathing response. The contrast between Rubio's flustered, defensive flailing and her quiet strength had become a viral sensation. By the hour, thousands of memes depicted Harris as the metaphorical matador, standing effortlessly while Rubio crashed into the bull's horns of his own mistakes. The internet's reaction was a tidal wave, one that Rubio wasn't prepared for. But it wasn't just memes that flooded the digital space, commentators from both sides of the political aisle weighed in. On the left, progressive voices hailed Harris as the clear victor, lauding her for dismantling Rubio's arguments with not only intellect but with grace. "This is the moment we've been waiting for," tweeted one prominent progressive influencer. Kamala just showed America how to handle a bully, and it wasn't with rage, it was with truth. On the other side, Rubio's supporters tried to salvage what they could, but the cracks were already beginning to show. News outlets sympathetic to Rubio quickly began reporting the fallout. His supporters were confused, torn between defending a man who had failed to deliver under pressure and recognizing the undeniable fact that Harris had bested him with ease. Within hours, numerous GOP pundits took to Twitter to express frustration, with one particularly high-profile conservative pundit commenting, "Marco Rubio had a golden opportunity tonight to show leadership. Instead, he showed weakness." As the hours passed, it became clear that Harris's performance had reverberated far beyond the debate stage. Politicians, celebrities, and pundits from all walks of life had chimed in, echoing the sentiment that had begun to dominate the national conversation: Harris had not just won a debate, she had changed the entire narrative. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "Kamala Harris just proved that it's not enough to fight hate with anger. It's time we fight it with intelligence, dignity, and resilience." The tweet received thousands of likes and retweets, cementing Harris as the progressive champion of the moment. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders added his voice in support, a reminder: it's not the loudest voice that wins, it's the most truthful. Hollywood, too, got in on the action. A-list celebrities, who had been publicly vocal in support of progressive values, began tweeting their admiration for Harris. Oprah Winfrey posted a short clip from the debate with the caption, "The calm before the storm." Kamala Harris just changed the conversation in American politics. Ava DuVernay, the acclaimed filmmaker, followed suit, adding, "Kamala Harris dismantled him with precision. This moment is history." Even Barack Obama, never one to jump too quickly into political phrase, took to Twitter to offer his praise. What happened tonight wasn't just about one person winning a debate. It was about showing the country that we can rise above fear, above hate. We can lead with dignity. But as much as Harris was gaining admiration from progressives and moderates, Rubio's supporters were beginning to splinter. Some were in denial, doubling down on their defense of him, while others quietly began to question their faith in his political strategy. His most ardent followers, those who had stood by him through thick and thin, were now forced to grapple with a truth they could no longer ignore: Rubio's control over the narrative had crumbled, and Harris had exposed it for all to see. And the impact was not limited to social media. In focus groups across the country, the reactions were just as explosive. Harris's name dominated the discussions. Republican-leaning voters who had once viewed Rubio as a rising star were now questioning whether he could truly stand up to the challenges ahead. Moderate independents who had felt uneasy about the political climate were now more inclined to see Harris as a viable alternative, someone who represented a calm, calculated response to the chaos they'd come to resent. The ripple effect of Harris's performance was undeniable. Every major news outlet across the country ran headlines about the stunning takedown and debate disaster for Rubio. Political pundits couldn't stop talking about it. What Rubio failed to understand, one expert on CNN said, is that Kamala Harris doesn't just know the facts, she knows how to cut through the noise and speak to the heart of what's wrong in this country. She's playing the long game, and she's winning. But perhaps the most telling sign of the shift came from within Rubio's own camp. Sources close to the senator began leaking reports of internal meetings where the party was scrambling to assess the damage. "The momentum's gone," one unnamed aide told the Washington Post. "The narrative is shifting, and it's hard to get it back. We don't know how to fight this kind of battle." As the day wore on, more and more voices began to resonate with the same sentiment: Kamala Harris had emerged as the true force to reckon with. Whether it was in the face of constant attacks from the right or the overwhelming criticisms from the left, Harris had managed to navigate the storm with unmatched grace, and it was paying off. As the days passed, the debate's aftermath continued to echo across the nation. But Kamala Harris wasn't finished, not yet. What had seemed like a simple political confrontation was, in her mind, far more significant. The battle for America's future wasn't won in a single exchange of words, it was won in the values that she stood for, the values that would guide the country towards something better. Kamala knew the fight wasn't about winning debates or scoring political points. It was about something deeper. She had faced off against Marco Rubio, but in that moment, she wasn't just defending her own position, she was defending the very ideals that had shaped her life: unity, integrity, and service. She had shown the world that leadership wasn't about who could shout the loudest or tear others down. Leadership was about bringing people together, even in the face of overwhelming division. It was about truth, about fighting for the common good. In the weeks following the debate, Harris found herself reflecting more on that critical moment: not the applause, not the headlines, but the bigger picture. What she had said on that stage wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a call to action. A reminder to the American people that no matter how fractured the country had become, no matter how much the rhetoric of fear and division had taken root, there was still hope for something better. And that hope wasn't in the hands of politicians who played to the lowest common denominator, who pandered to fear and anger, it was in the hands of those who dared to believe in a better way forward. She reflected on her journey, how, growing up in Oakland, she had been taught the importance of fighting for others. She thought of her mother, who had dedicated her life to cancer research, working tirelessly to help others, to make the world a better place. She thought of her own path through the legal system, the countless times she had fought to ensure that justice was served, and that those with no voice had someone to stand up for them. Kamala Harris had never been interested in the easy path. She had chosen a life of service because she believed that leadership meant making hard choices for the greater good, not for personal gain. And now, here she was, standing at the center of a political battle that was testing her resolve. The fight was no longer about just winning a debate, it was about showing the American people that the true measure of leadership wasn't the ability to tear others down, but the ability to build something greater, something unified. Kamala's voice echoed in the hearts of millions: this country is more than the sum of its divisions. It is a place where everyone, no matter their background, their race, or their station in life, should have the chance to thrive. Our strength is not in our differences, it is in our unity. Her message wasn't just a political talking point, it was a moral mandate. She wasn't asking for blind allegiance to a political party, she was asking for a commitment to the values that had always made America great. Integrity. Service. Justice. Compassion. Values that transcended partisan bickering, that looked past labels, and that sought to uplift every American, no matter where they came from or where they were headed. As she stood before the cameras, speaking directly to the nation in the days following the debate, she focused not on the cheap shots or the petty attacks from her opponents, but on the bigger vision she was fighting for. This was her moment not just to rebut Marco Rubio's lies, but to reaffirm the principles that had guided her through every challenge in her life. The message was clear: the true strength of America was found not in division, but in the shared dignity of its people. Harris, calm, resolute. We are a country built on ideals, the ideals of freedom, justice, and opportunity. But those ideals only become reality when we stand together, when we choose dignity over hatred, service over self-interest, and truth over division. The battle is not between left and right, it's between the forces of unity and the forces of fear. And I believe, with every fiber of my being, that unity will always win. She spoke directly to those who had been left behind, those who felt abandoned by a system that didn't listen to them. She knew they were watching, waiting to see who would stand up for them. Her message wasn't just about politics, it was about the heart of America. It was a reminder that the values that had always made this country great could still guide it to a brighter future. Harris, inspirational, with conviction. The truth is this: no matter how many attacks come my way, no matter how much the forces of division try to tear us apart, we will stand together. We will choose a future of unity, of opportunity, and of justice. Because when we act with dignity, when we act with integrity, and when we fight for each other, we will always win. And in that moment, it wasn't just Kamala Harris speaking, it was the collective hope of a country yearning for leadership that wasn't just about winning elections, but about winning hearts and minds. The audience, both online and in person, felt a shift. The power wasn't in the hands of those who stoked fear and division, it was in the hands of those who believed that service to others was the highest calling, that dignity was worth fighting for, and that unity was the only way forward. What we witnessed today wasn't just a debate, it was a powerful reminder of what true leadership looks like. Kamala Harris didn't just win that moment, she showed us the kind of leader we need in times of division and despair. A leader who stands firm in truth, who fights with dignity, and who never backs down in the face of adversity. This isn't just about one politician or one debate. It's about all of us, about the values we stand for and the future we're choosing to build. Unity, integrity, justice. These are the pillars that hold our country together, and they are the values we must all fight for, every single day. If you believe in what Kamala Harris stood for, if you believe in a vision of America that is stronger together, where dignity and service rise above fear and division, then it's time to act. Share this video, subscribe, and become a part of this movement. The fight for a better future is far from over, but together, we can make a difference. Let your voice be heard. Stand up for the truth, for unity, and for the values that will guide us toward a brighter tomorrow. So, don't just sit back, join the conversation. Share your thoughts, your hopes, and your vision for the future. The world is watching, and now is the time to make your mark. Because when we stand together, we will win. Subscribe, share, and be a part of this movement. Let's build a future that reflects the truth, dignity, and service we all deserve.